So thank you everyone for joining this session. This is the first session of a program, a series of presentations that's being called Baha'i Educator Talks. And it was somewhat influenced by TED Talks. I realized that there were a number of people, a very large number of people who are interested and involved in education in the Baha'i community, and that many of us are not getting any younger. And if we didn't start talking to each other and sharing our experiences, someday somebody would regret it. So this was actually inspired by a dear friend of mine, the probably #1 partner of the Anissa project, Don Streets, dying completely unexpectedly. I was literally planning to go and see him in a couple of weeks. And I was very angry with him for dying. It was really the first time that I felt that way, because I felt cheated. I felt as if, we had just started talking in depth about his experience, his, decades and decades of experience in education. And then he went. So I said, that's not happening again. Okay. I'm going to make sure that we create a permanent record that we can pass on to future generations. So we're going to get started. Larry, you need to mute yourself because currently we're hearing your background. Everybody else is muted. I'm going to mute myself. And Rodney Clarkin is going to introduce himself. I thought that was less formal than to have me read his CV or try to figure out which parts of his CV to read. So he's going to tell you a little bit about himself, and then he's going to give a presentation. You're on.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, Peter, and I look forward to having this conversation with you. And I do hope it will be a conversation or in the spirit of consultation. So if you are holding back, you shouldn't do that. And in fact, if you are interested, you may want to take notes. I'm going to be stopping periodically. I am an educator by profession, and I do have the idea of trying to be on top of what the students are thinking and trying to speak to them. And so hopefully we'll be able to have that conversation here. The interest that I have starts from a very early age. In Iowa, and in that time, I was very much interested in trying to find out 3 major questions. One is, who am I? What is my purpose? And what should I do to realize my potential and my full purpose? And so in my talking about Baha'i education, I have framed that as the developing human potential, which I think is the phrase that probably most captures the idea about Baha'i education. I then went on and pursued a career in education as a teacher and then a professor, later as a director and a dean, and retired in 2012 to go to the World Center, the Baha'i World Center, to volunteer full-time for 7 years. And from that time, I have been volunteering around the world. I left there, went to China, then to India, and I now live in the Virgin Islands, where I've been for the last couple of years. And I had lived here back in the 80s, from 83 to 88. So it is a coming back to help serve this community. I'm going to be presenting in a fairly succinct fashion a conceptual framework for developing human potential. And that framework is rather simple. We're dealing with 18 concepts. And in fact, I'll try to present it rather quickly and rather succinctly, because the key to developing human potential is going to be in our conversation, in our being able to consult about how you actually put this into practice. So the first concept I want to focus on is what and who are we as human beings? And all of my comments are going to be based primarily on my study of the Baha'i writings. They're going to be my understanding and my interpretation. I'm going to try and present the truth as I see it and know it, but knowing very well that my truth is limited and faulty. And so every time I speak, I am hoping to learn more. In fact, I would say every time I do speak, I do learn more. And so it is partly in our conversing about these and consulting about what they mean, pondering about them, reflecting on them, and then trying to put them in practice that we are able to learn. And in fact, that's kind of the learning model that the Universals of Justice is put forward in the learning mode, and I will be referring to that here. I use acronyms or different metaphors to help me memorize or remember things. The acronym I have for learning, or the learning model, is arcs, as in an arc in a circle. And as an arc in a circle, you can start on any point in the arc and progress around it. And the A stands for action, the R stands for reflection, C for consultation, and the S for study. So these are kind of the aspects of a learning mode. And today I'm going to be presenting some things maybe in the form of study. We'll be consulting and reflecting on it. And we will be talking about what action you might do or you might have others do to help them develop their full potential. Because that's actually been my goal from the beginning for my own personal life and for the life of my students, whether it's been in an elementary school or it has been at the university. It continues to be my main purpose, is to help others develop their potential. And so I hope that through this talk, every one of you will not only be able to have a deeper understanding of your own potential, but how you can develop that, and then how you can help develop that in your communities, in the institutions you're involved with, and in the greater society. So to do that, though, we need to have a proper conceptual framework. And I think the beginning of that is to understand who we are as human beings. And basically, my understanding is we have three natures. You might say we have two natures. We have a material nature and we have a spiritual nature. The material nature is rather obvious to us all. It's this body. This is my material nature. And this body is often what we think of when we think of our identity, that this is Rod, this is, and I am all these characteristics. I have a beard, I wear glasses, I have this color of hair and skin and whatever. This is what the world primarily thinks of in terms of identity, but it is a very limited view. And our bodies actually represent the lowest aspect of our reality as human beings. Our bodies are actually animal bodies. These bodies have evolved over a millennium, and they have all the characteristics of the animal, and we share that. And this body also has its capacities, and these capacities are important for us to live in this world, but it is not our purpose. It is not this is not the potential that we need to be focused on, as in most people are focused on. They're looking at developing their physical or material potential. They want to make more money. They want to be healthy. They want to have more power, all material kinds of ideas. This is not the purpose of life. This does not bring happiness. And this is not something that anyone should be aspiring to. We all start our life, though, out as bodies. We all start in our mother's wombs as a single cell zygote that has no characteristics. You look at it under a microscope, you just see a single dot. But within that single cell is potential, is all of the potential that you see in me today. It's all those potentialities that gradually had to go through various stages to get to this stage. And in fact, I'm at the stage where my body is deteriorating. And this body doesn't have half the strength it had when I was younger. And its strength is getting less and less as I go along, until finally this body will die. It will perish and it will leave this earth. And so if my existence, if my identity is tied up in this body, I am going to have a very limited existence, and my best days are behind me, because I can no longer do physically the things I used to do. So unfortunately, we live in a very materialistic world, a world that thinks this is reality, that if you can't see it, then it doesn't exist. And as a result, we are suffering, and we will continue to suffer. And we see that suffering all over the world, because people are identifying with a physical reality that is not their true identity. What distinguishes this body from the animals that are outside in the Virgin Islands, where I'm living right now, is that I have a mind. And it is that mind that makes me human. This mind is different from the mind of animals. Animals have minds that can see, hear, do all of those sensory things. In fact, they can do things sensorily better than I can. They can see better, they can hear better, smell, taste, etc. But they do not have this rational intellectual capacity that has been a special endowment to human beings. And it is this mind, this mental capacity, that distinguishes this body from an animal. And that mind has also gone through stages. It started off coming into this world having no concepts, nothing to relate to. It lived in a world of darkness where basically its senses were not active. And ever since that time, I began processing. Each one of us began trying to develop those minds, being able to learn language, to be able for us to speak, for me to make sounds and put them together into sentences that have meaning, and for you to hear them, and for you to take that meaning and to make sense of that in your own brain. This is far beyond the capacity of any animal. we're able to conceptualize things that are not physical. We are able to abstract realities. And so these are all things that I think we can consider. This is the capacity to build civilizations, create culture, language, the arts, and the inventions and such. So this is a remarkable creation. And most people in the world will accept that idea. They may say, well, the mind just makes us a little smarter, doesn't make us different from an animal. But I say, and my understanding is that it does, that we are categorically different from an animal, just as an animal is different from a plant. Having this capacity of the rational faculty and intelligence is distinctive. It is a unique capacity, and you can see how we can use that capacity for good or for evil. Now, up to this point, most everybody would agree, and most everyone also would agree that this body and this mind develop incrementally, gradually in stages, and that there was a time when it was basically had no real capacity, and then it gradually developed capacity. Physically, I was able to speak, to do this, to use my body, to control my body. And my mind, the idea is then that the mind would control the body. When the body got hungry and said, eat, I wouldn't just go and grab somebody's food. I wouldn't go and just eat in a random kind of way, that I would eat according to a certain cultural norms and choose foods according to that. That then is the mind telling the body, okay, you're hungry, but you need to eat according to certain cultural norms and such. The same with all the other bodily needs and desires, that you have them, but they are to be controlled and they are to be expressed according to certain values, certain cultural values and human norms. And so most people have no problem with this. They understand that. And we do live in a society where some people will say, but if I have this urge, then I should be free to satisfy. But as we see within our cultural practices, most people do try to express those within certain cultural boundaries and limits. Now, up to this point, most everyone agrees with this analysis. But there is another aspect to our human beings that actually take us beyond our human nature. If we just stay in our minds, we are human beings, but we have the capacity to become divine. We have the capacity to become angels. We have the capacity, we have a spiritual capacity, which most of our languages refer to as the soul. And you can call it the human spirit, whatever, but this capacity distinguishes some humans from other humans, and it is that capacity that can recognize the creator, that can recognize a higher power, a transcendent force, transcendent being, that can recognize the messengers and manifestations of God, and can see in them the reflection of God, and can look to them to answer the questions of who am I, what is my purpose, and how do I most fulfill my potential and my purpose? How do I realize my highest state of being, knowing? And that can only truly be answered, I believe, through these messengers of God, these educators. So we're talking about Baha'i education. We are talking about the greatest educators of humanity. And of course, the Baha'i educator would be Baha'u'llah. And that educator has really shed knowledge throughout the entire universe. But here in the world, we are able to grasp that primarily through the revelation, through the Word of God. And we do that then by trying to come to understand that and to obey that, which ultimately leads to our highest purpose, our true purpose in life. And our true identity is not our body, and it is not even our mind. It is that unseen, incomprehensible soul, that energy that actually allows our mind to be able to know God, to love God, and obey God. It is that power that we are in this world to develop. That is our purpose. In the same way, when we are in our mother's womb, we had one purpose. That was primarily to develop this physical body so that it could not only survive, but thrive in this world, that it would then have all the tools it needed to be able to flourish in this material existence. And we were fortunately, by God, given DNA that helped us to decide, okay, let's put 2 eyes here, a nose here, a mouth here, ears here. We had no way to know that in our mother's womb, that we would need any of those things, let alone where they should go, and that we want arms and legs, and that in the process of developing, these cells in between our fingers would need to die off so that we'd have these appendages. All of these very intricate, minute type things were decided by God through and enacted through our following the DNA. The same thing is really true about our souls in this world. We are now in the process of developing our souls in this womb. You could call this the womb, or the world the womb. And this is the opportunity for us, in the same way in the world of the womb was the opportunity for us to develop all the physical characteristics we needed for this world. We can develop all the spiritual characteristics we need for the next world. The purpose of this world is like the purpose of the world of the womb. It is to die from that world and to be born into the next. Our purpose here is to acquire the spiritual body we need and to go on and become the people who can live in the next world. So, and we want to be able to live fully and healthily. And so we're able to do that by having a full spiritual characteristics. And these characteristics help us to realize what our meaning is in this world. Our meaning is not to live like an animal. In fact, the animals living, because their purpose in life is not to develop spiritual qualities. Their purpose in life is to flourish materially, their body to be healthy and such. They're very well equipped to do that, much better than we are. And if we focus ourselves on that purpose, that's how an animal finds happiness. They get the fresh water and food and places to be safe and food, whatever. That creates their happiness. That will not create happiness for the human being. That is not our potential. That is not our purpose. Our purpose is to try to realize our higher nature, our higher being, which is only able to be done by accessing the messenger, the manifestation, the great educators of God, and having their guidance, that spirit, tap into that spirit so that we can grow and become full of the attributes and names of God. So in a way, this body becomes like the placenta to the embryo in the womb. Just through this body that I'm able to take in the spiritual nutrients and to give off the waste that I need to give. This body is the vehicle for my developing my spiritual qualities. So it's not a bad thing. It's actually a very important thing. It's a thing we need to develop our spiritual qualities. But again, it is not the thing. When we die, like the placenta, this body is left behind. This, like the placenta, will go back to dust. Because it came from dust, it goes back to dust. Our soul, which came from God, will go back to God. Now, what condition it goes back to God is going to depend on our capacities that we've developed of the soul in this world. Because this world actually offers an ideal laboratory for developing the soul. In the same way that in the womb, you go from a one-cell microscopic creature to a fully developed human baby in 9 months. That process of going from one cell to a fully developed human took millions and millions of years to happen evolutionarily. But we do it in 9 months. We go through that whole process of a one-cell creature to something like a germ, to a fish, to whatever, onward, until finally we emerge as a human being. This process is analogous to the process we can go through in this world. Because we have this body, we are able to go through millions of years of spiritual development that is not going to happen in the next world. Because we have some control. We can use our own souls to develop those spiritual qualities here. And if we don't, if we focus instead on just developing our physical and our mental capacities, then we will be born just like an embryo that said, oh, I'm just going to focus, let all of this energy stay with the placenta. I don't need any of those things. I'm happy just floating in this amniotic fluid. No problem until they get born. And when they get born, then they realize the mistake that they made. They realize they wasted their time in the embryo. And that, I think, will be the fate for a number of people in this world. When they leave this world, they will either be welcomed into the next world with the host welcoming them and gathering around them and asking them to recount, what they suffered in the path of God, or they will be at a whole different level. So that's our choice. We've been given the capacity, and we've been given the spiritual capacity. We have to exercise that. And what happens is we get so consumed with the material and with the physical. Primarily, when we talk about the mental in that condition, we're talking about the ego, the egoic self, the self-centered self, the conception that I am the center of the universe. I am the most important. It's a narcissistic self. And it is a self that, if it stays in that condition, is basically centered on the placenta and will fail to develop its true self to be born into the next world. So with that, and because we have a very small group, and because I am an educator, I would like to just take a moment and see if anyone has a comment, a question at this point. And if not, you can either put it in the chat, you can come in now, let Peter know, whatever.
Yes, what I suggest is that if you want to say something, you just unmute yourself. You see,
Okay.
there's a little. You have to unmute yourself and then go ahead, and then maybe show your face so that your interlocutor is and knows what you look like, even though you already showed your face. But yeah, so. And I'm sure that there's somebody here who either wants to say yes, Rod, I've read the Baha'i writings and I agree with you, or oh, I have a different understanding of this. In any case, please go ahead.
All right. Well, I'm going to carry on. The reason I stop is I'm going to move into a different set of conceptual framework. So just to review, we've focused on the three natures, or the three aspects of being a human being: the body, the mind, and the soul. What happens is we don't experience them generally as three different aspects. We tend to experience them through our mind as one reality. And so we're not able to discern, unless we become conscious, and especially if we become spiritually conscious, that that's my lower self that's speaking, that's my lower desire, and that's a desire that I don't want to give into. And those desires are not a bad thing. But if you don't use your muscles to overcome them, your spiritual muscles, then you will atrophy, you'll move into a state where you are unhealthy. And so in the same way that in this world, if I want to develop muscles, I have to work against gravity. So I actually have some weights here that sometimes when I'm sitting reading or doing something, I am working against gravity to try and preserve some of the few muscles I have left. So that's how it works. If I was in outer space without gravity, my body would begin deteriorating. And in fact, most people are in space. It's not that we can't sustain people in space. It's that the longer they stay there, the more their bodies deteriorate, and they cannot come back and ever regain that. The kind of bone and muscle loss, they can only get back to a certain extent. So we are in that same situation here. In this world, all of the troubles and tests and problems we have to deal with, especially spiritually, are like gravity. And it's only as we work against them, or we overcome them, or we use them to develop our spiritual capacities, that we are able to develop. And so most people, I grew up on a farm, and my father would say, why are you working out? You should go out and work in the farm. Because the idea is you don't want to do this if you don't have to do that. And in terms of spiritually, we need to, it's only in our interactions with the world that we can go through those millions of years of evolution. Because in the next world, we are going to be weightless. We are not going to have this body, this ego that we have to overcome, that we have to, oh, I want to love that person, but it is so hard, or I want to be good, but I don't think I can do it, you know? And then you strive and you struggle and you overcome. And then next time you don't only have one of them, you get two of them. It's like, oh my God, I could do one. Now you're giving me twice the weight. This is really a challenge. And so we go through life gradually, just like as a child, we gradually develop our skills and capacities. We gradually, daily develop our spiritual capacities. And it is only by exercising them that they grow. And we can only do that in this world. That's the wisdom of our being with this body, that this body allows us to manifest those spiritual qualities because we get to overcome them. And so I think if you have a lot of human desires, which people do have, physical desires, if you have a strong ego, these are not necessarily bad things. They're only bad things if you let them control you and you don't take control of them. Because it's by working against that ego that wants to be the superior or the center of attention. It's by overcoming that you develop your spiritual qualities. And so I think, and so once you see that, you see test in a different way, in the same way that once we begin exercising, people love to go exercising. You know, people go and lift 100-pound weights, and you think, why are they doing that? Well, because they know that they're getting some benefit from it. And so they get some enjoyment, or they go run a marathon or do something like that. All of these things create a possibility to develop physically, just as my dealing with the tests and challenges of being in a physical body with a mind that is filled with vain imaginings and idle fancies, that I can develop my capacities. So I see you're on, Michael. Did you have a question?
I just wanted to offer my from my study of the writings, and I know depending on what you look at, sometimes it's three natures, sometimes it's two natures.
Yes.
The way I've kind of reconciled that is, so we have a lower nature, which is and then our higher nature, which is the soul, and the sitting in between those two things is the rational faculty. And the rational faculty is what we use, or I mean, call it the mind, is what we use to rationalize living in our higher nature or living in our lower nature.
I think that's good.
Yeah.
I think in another place, Abdu'l-Baha in Some Answered Questions talks about the 5 physical powers and the 5 spiritual powers. And then he talks about the common faculty, which I think it's that faculty that communicates between the body and the soul. So I think most of the writings say we have 2 natures. We have a body and we have a soul. We have a material, we have a spiritual. But when you get a bit deeper, and another place in Some Answered Questions where Abdu'l-Baha is talking about 3 kinds of education. He talks about we have an inherited character, which really is our physical body. We have an innate character, which is really our soul. And then we have an acquired character, which is really our mind. it's the interaction of our body and our soul interacting with the environment. And so I'm just giving here some of the briefest kind of a conceptual framework, and the details and all of the deeper understanding of that comes gradually as you, like yourself, begin applying this and begin trying to understand it more deeply. And it is then in having conversations like we're having just to help each one of us to get to a deeper understanding. So we can never completely understand it, but as we become a bit more clear, I think we can grow and develop. And as Abdul Baha said, the acquired character has a great influence, and that we can overcome much by basically education. So education is a very central tool, I think, within the Baha'i framework for developing human potential. It develops what we were given physically. I've been given certain physical capacities. I have a certain height, certain abilities physically, and that's going to limit me in terms of what I can do physically. I've also been given a certain innate capacities, and that's also going to limit or allow me to express my spirituality in ways that are going to be unique to everyone else. And what's going to kind of moderate those two things is the acquired capacity, the education, the effort that I am extending to develop those. So if I chose not to lift the weights, if I chose not to feed the body, if I didn't take care of it and get healthy when I was sick, it would come to naught. And the same is true with the soul. If I don't feed it, and we'll talk later about how do you feed the soul, how do you keep it healthy, how do you develop that strength, what are some exercises that are prescribed for developing that, then we won't grow.
I just thought of another analogy. So we have the ability to make things like technology.
Yes.
And it's technology, and there's people out there who say technology is bad. And technology itself, it's not good or bad, it's how it's used.
Exactly.
It can be used to uplift humanity, or it can be used for destructive purposes or selfish purposes.
Yeah. Well, which kind of leads as a segue into the next part of my talk, which is basically we have these three natures, or these three aspects to our humanness. We also have three primary capacities. We have three, you could even say they're potentialities, that make this, that are aspects of the soul that manifest through the mind. And they're the capacity to think, to feel, and to act. Now, we could say these are the capacities that we actually share in common with animals, because animals can also think. They see that, they know what to do, and they have feelings and they have motivations. They primarily come from their instincts and from their body. What makes us unique is we do start off life thinking, feeling, and acting based upon our bodies. When we're babies, when we get hungry, we cry. We don't think, oh, now is not a good time. Mom's asleep and I just woke her up 2 hours ago. Dad's not in a good mood, whatever. Your body is hungry. It expresses itself. Your body needs to relieve itself. It expresses itself. There is no control. There is no mental control. You are in the early stages of your life, very living in an analogous stage to an animal. It's only as your mind comes on board that you're able to begin to start controlling the body and its desires, its feelings, and its motives. So what the body thinks, what the body feels, and what the body wants to do isn't necessarily right. And so your mind then is able to be able to moderate and control those as you develop along that route. So I think it's important for us to recognize that our capacity to think really leads to a conscious knowledge. And our capacity to feel leads to a conscious ability to love at a level that is distinct and unique from those of animals. And finally, our capacity to will transcends that of an animal, because we are able to utilize our soul and our minds to regulate what we think, feel, and do. And that is these three capacities that are what makes us uniquely human. And I believe these are the three key spiritual capacities. And to kind of lead us on to the next topic, which is going to be our purpose, is that our purpose is to use our knowing, loving, and willing capacities to know God, to love God, and to obey God. And it is through our doing that we realize our full potential, that we develop our spiritual being. And that is our purpose. It's not to know our body, to know and our physical feelings and to worship them. It is to know God, love God, and to worship God. So we have it a bit backwards, I think, in our culture, where it's all about knowing me, my feelings, and satisfying my desires. So we need to develop those. And as we develop them, we start off just like we started off in the embryo, as a one cell. Our capacity to know, to love, and to will is just one cell. But then gradually, as we go through infancy, we develop all of those capacities. We're able to control them, to moderate them, and as a result, we grow and develop. So I have a rather developed model related on these three of knowing, loving, and willing. And we know, love, and will through the body, the mind, and the soul. And then ultimately, even when we go past the soul, we need to see, to know with the eyes of God, and to feel the love of God, and to act with the actions of God. So we need to move gradually. We transcend those lower ways of knowing, loving, and willing, and move into the higher ways of knowing and loving and willing. And again, that happens through our interaction with the environment. We don't just sit and in the same way that our body develops, we have to interact with the environment. We are all the time trying to figure out how to move and use our body as infants and toddlers. And we are still often trying to do that same thing. How do we know, love, and behave in a way that is going to be helpful to our soul, in the same way we try to know, love, and behave in a way that's helpful to our body and our minds? The metaphor I use mostly is the metaphor of a wind turbine, which has 3 different spokes going out. And each spoke represents one of these capacities: capacity to know, the capacity to love, and the capacity to will. And each one of us is uniquely developed in those areas. And each of us tends to favor one of those spokes over the other. There are those of us who tend to be what I will call head people, people who are heart people, and people who are like action people. And so we need to balance those things. Whatever we are, we need to, if we're a head person, for instance, we need to spend more time developing our loving and willing capacities, and to make us a balanced human being, to allow our full potential to come out. Because all of these potentialities need to be unified and need to be moderated. And each one of them is leading us towards God. And that's the ultimate goal. So the goal of knowledge and the food of knowledge is truth. Because on each one of these, there's a positive and negative aspect to it that you can know, and this is what we were just alerting to earlier. You can use your knowledge for good or for evil. You can use your love. You can have truth and you can have falsehood. So if you know a falsehood, that's a negative. If you know a truth, then you're going in a positive direction. If you love something, then that's a positive. If you hate, that's a negative. If you are doing good, that's a positive. If you're doing bad, that's a negative. And I also have put forth kind of a formula that knowing times loving times willing equals the value of any action. So if all of them are positive, if you have truth guided by love, guided by a good action, then you have a positive value. And the more truth, the more love, the more positive action, the more positive the value. So if you have like 3 truth, 2 love, and 1 action, that's going to give you a multiple of that. If, on the other hand, any one of those is a negative, you're going to have a negative response. So, for instance, if I know a falsehood and I love that falsehood, that's a negative. And I love that falsehood, which is a positive. And then I act on that love of that falsehood, the value is going to be negative. If I have a truth and I hate that truth and I act on that, that's going to be. But on the other hand, if you have 2 negatives, it makes a positive. If I hate a falsehood and I act on that, that becomes a positive. And I don't want to dwell too long on that because there are many people who don't like or get the math. But for those who do, it may be helpful. But I think if you go back to this metaphor of the windmill or the wind turbine, you'll see that there are people who have great knowledge, but very little love, and maybe very little action. And so their value in the world is and if you want to use, let's go back to that mathematical model. Let's say we have great knowledge and even decent love, but you have no action, you do nothing with it, then it's going to, if you have a 0 value, whatever you've got here is going to be 0. The same, if you have no knowledge, you love and action, there's no real result. And if you have no feelings, if you have neither love nor hate, you're also not going to be acting. So these are just, it's a model that I think will help you. I think I've written a paper just on all the different metaphors of that model. And by the way, if you want to get more in depth into any of the things that I've talked about tonight, you can go to my website just by Googling my name, and you'll find papers and books and presentations and courses and compilations, etc., etc. So in fact, there is a compilation I've done on developing human potential from the Baha'i writings, which is based on this format. It's 690 pages, and it's not the most useful, but you may be able to find something there and be of value or interest to you. And I also do have more concise documents on the same topic, and presentations where I actually use diagrams to show. And if there's time later, I'll put up a diagram that will explain some of this. So with that, we have these three capacities: to know, to love, and to will. They are led, their ultimate goal of knowing is truth. The ultimate goal of loving is unity. And the ultimate goal of acting is justice. And so we have these three basic capacities, which also lead to our being able to moderate them. In other words, in the same way that you need to balance these things, we need to balance truth, unity, and justice. And one of the balances that I recommend, and are a way that I understand it from the Baha'i community, that you always have to balance them, moderate truth with love and justice. But in the individual and in your individual life, if you're to give primacy to any of those, it is to give primacy to truth. And throughout the Baha'i writings, there's a strong emphasis on the independent investigation of truth. And so that's something each individual has to do independently and on their own. Obviously, we then do that in a community and institutions. The other thing is that when it comes to the capacity to love, we also, that leads to unity. But the capacity to love, you can't develop it by just yourself. Just as an individual sitting here, I'm going to love more. Love is a capacity that is, the primary value is love is in the community. To the extent that if, for instance, you're consulting within the community and you have some difference of opinion, the truth is not the most important thing. Unity is the most important thing. And then when it comes to the institutions, the primary virtue, the primary power, the primary force, value that they should focus on is justice. And as a result, our institutions will be called houses of justice. And so we as individuals need to practice all three of them, but within our roles in the community, we need to focus more on, depending on which area are we as an individual in, as an individual person, community, or institution. So again, I'm going to take a pause to see if we have any comments or questions, because I'm going to be moving on. My friend, give it to me.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts about the assertion that the reason we do not have world peace is because too many people are not aspiring to live in their higher nature.
Well, that's, to me, that's obvious, but that's almost also too simple, because so what? If we were, but I think there's probably a better paradigm and a better conceptual framework to deal with. Just in the same way that we just started off, we start with truth, and with truth, you go to love. With love, you go to justice. Those become foundational. In fact, this kind of windmill, then, once it begins spinning, it actually turns into kind of unity. And if you look at the seven valleys, you have search, knowledge, love, knowledge. And these three are, once you pass them, you go into the valley of unity. Because these three, really, we're looking at them as unique blades. But once they start working together, you don't see the blades. You don't distinguish, well, this is truth, love, or justice. You just distinguish it as being good. So within the Baha'i paradigm, the idea is that truth is the foundation, love is the essential requisite, then justice, which leads to unity, and unity is the foundation of peace. So each one is foundational. You start with independent investigation, you work within the community, develop love, within the institutions, greater, you develop justice. That justice, when you have those three going on, you have unity. If any one of those is missing, for instance, if you do some wrong to me and some institution doesn't bring about justice on some level, then I feel impelled to bring my own justice, which often is going to be disproportionate, and it begins the process that leads to the wars that we have right now. And you see this in all the kinds of wars. So you push me, I push you back harder. I'm slapping, we're hitting, clubs come out, and somebody pulls out a knife and then a gun. And it's a fairly simple. And if you know that, if you have those concepts, then you're able to analyze it in a much finer tune. So you can look at the world problems and world peace and say, first of all, we are living with a lot of falsehoods. The first thing is, this is wrong. The idea of who we are as human beings, wrong. The idea of who we are as societies, as nations, wrong. All of these ideas are wrong. The idea of love is very self-centered. If it goes beyond us, it's very ethnocentric, which is really the stage where humanity is right now. Just as I was telling you, and most of the talk that I've been given is more focused on the individual, but all of these concepts apply collectively as well. Humanity has gone through its infancy, its childhood, its adolescence. And each one of those stages is characterized by a different way of thinking, feeling, and acting. And each messenger of God has spoken to that particular level of thinking, feeling, and acting, and tried to move humanity to the next higher stage. So now you're a toddler, now you're acting this way. That's okay as a toddler, but now you're no longer a toddler. It's not acceptable. There are different ways you need to think. There's different ways you need to feel, and there's different ways you need to act. And right now, we are acting in an adolescent society, which is very ethnocentric. Adolescents are very peer-oriented. They're all about their friends, and it's about making them happy, and they'll do crazy things to do that. And if you're not part of their group, It's them, you're other. And we are so much in that stage right now. We have very much adolescent identity around the world. You know, I'm an American, I'm a whatever, Russian, I'm a whatever, or I'm a this race, or I'm of this gender, or I'm of this class. All of these things have become the barriers to peace, which the Universals of Justice identified in their 1985 letter to the world on peace. So I think, you know, if you want peace, you know, go back and read that message, which for me was one of the most enlightening statements to come out. It transformed my way of thinking about the Baha'i faith. And it gave me a higher way of thinking, a higher way of talking and acting. And so, you know, those very barriers are faults in the ways we think, feel, and act. And I'll use myself as an example here to kind of drive that point home. You know, men think, feel, and act as if they are superior to women. This is a falsehood. It's based on an untruth, which men happen to love and society happens to endorse. They happen to act on it. And we, in the end, have a negative result. The same in terms of race. People of a certain color skin say that they are superior or better to people who have a different color skin. And therefore, this falsehood, which has no basis in science or religion, people love it, they act on it, negative. We do the same about class, that people of a higher class think they're better than people of a lower class, our higher economic status. We do the same in nationalities. And the area that we are in the most destructive is in religion. And this is the fifth barrier that the House of Justice talks about. It is this religious prejudice, because each of the religions thinks it's us, we're the best. And they love that idea, they worship that idea, and they'll act on it to the extent of trying to kill those people who don't agree with their view of the world, their view of religion. And until we can overcome these barriers through education, through teaching the truth, through teaching how to love and how to act, we will not progress as a society. And quite frankly, based on my understanding of the writings, we've been given the opportunity. Baha'u'llah gave us all of the answers. He gave us all the medicine to heal the world's ills. He offered it to the kings and rulers. He said, here it is. You can save your society. You can save your world. You can establish the most great peace. They turned away. Now it's come to us. We are the people responsible to try and bring that about. And as we do that, we have to recognize it's also going to go through various stages. And what has happened is humanity clings to these falsehoods. They cling to their hatreds. They cling to their evil, bad, harmful deeds. And as a result, and they won't give them up, even though Baha'u'llah said, this is the way. Here, this will heal you. This is what will bring about peace. And it's not like it's, but no, we're choosing to go down this path of suffering. And so it appears we're not going to break out of this problem until we suffer in a way that humanity has never suffered before. So any other thoughts, Michael, or comments or questions?
No, that was great. Thank you.
All righty. So what I'm going to do, because we can come back and visit all of these things as we want. And I don't want to keep you much longer. So I want to move on to how do we develop the soul? What are some, we know how to, well, science is telling us how to have a healthy body. Our culture and civilization is working on having a healthy mind. Obviously, Baha'u'llah, the prophets, they all have given guidance on how to do that as well. But their primary guidance is how to develop our souls, how for us to be spiritually healthy, how for us to develop our spiritual potential, how for us to become our true selves, not to become these animals crawling around the dust, not to become these prideful, greedy, arrogant human beings that are destroying the planet. We are to be spiritual creations. We have been given this endowment. This is the primary purpose for which God created this universe, for us to come to know, love, and worship God. That's why this whole thing was created. That's why the plants and animals and everything are here, so that we, the apex of physical creation, could begin this spiritual process that's going to last for eternity, that's going to see us go through so many worlds of God, so many stages of God. This is the launching pad. And what we do here, based on my understanding of the holy writings, is going to have a big impact on what happens in the next stage. Now, it's important to realize that we've all been given different endowments. We've been given different physical endowments, different mental endowments, and different spiritual developments. Baha'u'llah uses a metaphor of talking about where he says this flood of grace is pouring down on us. And all we need to do is just capture that grace. And he says some of them will just be in a thimble, they'll just fill up a thimbleful. And some of them will fill up a palm of a hand. But some of them will even fill up a gallon measure. So, for instance, I have this gallon measure here. Let's say we were given the gallon measure, and I look at the amount of grace that I've acquired here, and I look at this person with the thimble, and I say, "Oh, poor soul." And then I look at the person with the palm of the hand. Oh, I can fill that up. What happens though is I'm not going to be judged by this. If he has filled up this thimble to the full, he's achieved his potential, or she. If this person with the palm of the hand has, a little bit of this, but if their hand is full, then they've filled it. Whereas I'm going to go to the next world and say, "Oh, look at me. Look at all this that I have." And they're going to look at me and say, "You were given a whole gallon and you're bringing us this?" I mean, how embarrassed should you be? How sad is that you can't, we should not be comparing ourselves to God. We each have our own potential. We each have to fulfill our potential. It's said in the Bible in a way that I think is nice. It says, "For whomsoever much has been given, so shall much be required." So you give me $100 and say, "Okay, bring back something," and I bring back, $10 worth of food. You give one person $1 and they bring back $1 worth of food. Who did the right thing? even though I brought 10 times more than that person did. So it is nothing to do with our capacity. It's what we do with the capacity. And it's not for us to compare, oh, he's so much better than I am, or she's so much smarter than I am. That's not our less or whatever. That's not part of God's game. God's game is you take care of yourself. Every day you check how much have you filled up. Bring yourself to account each day, ere you are going to be moving into that next world. Because once you move into that next world, you're not going to be able to get any more grace. What you've done here is that's all you take with you. You can't say, oh, I got this whole gallon, give me a little bit more. No, you wasted it. You've wasted that time. And so it's very important, I think, for us to think about our capacities to know, to love, and to will, and that we develop those capacities every day. And it is a daily practice. How do you do these things? By practicing every day. You do it by using the learning mode. You act, you try to learn something, you try to love, you try to do good, and then you reflect on that, and then you consult with somebody, and then you study more, and then you act again, and you get into this cycle. And every day, you hopefully tomorrow, I will know more than I did today. Tomorrow, I will love more than I love today. Tomorrow, I will do better than I did today. This is the whole plan. This is the way, the whole plan of the universe. Everything grows gradually. You can't just say, oh, I haven't been doing this. I'm going to spend 10 hours praying today. It doesn't work that way. It's just like say, oh, I haven't been lifting this, now I'm going to go and lift 100 pounds or something. It doesn't work that way. You've got to gradually develop your spiritual muscle. And so how do we do that? I'm going to give you 6 essential requisites for spiritual growth. These are requisites that were identified by the Universal House of Justice in a 1 September 1983 message to the National Spiritual Assembly of Norway. And we'll use that as a beginning point for what we should be doing every day to exercise our spiritual muscles, so that when we die from this world, this placenta gets discarded and we are born into a world of light. We have those capacities, that capacity of knowing, loving, and willing, that we've grown here over the decades we've had on this planet, that we've grown and they're bearing fruit, so that when they come into that world, it's like, oh, you've got all of your fingers and your toes kind of idea. So I have an acronym that I use to help people remember these 6 practices. The acronym isn't perfect, but I find it helpful. And so if you find it helpful, you may want to use it. You also, if you have a pen and paper, you may want to write it down and go back to it, or go back to that message and study it. The word is prisms. Prisms. And if you know prisms, they're usually a triangle. They can be different shapes. But the white light from the sun comes through them, and it divides out into the various colors that our visible eyes can see. These 6 practices combined create that white light of the Holy Spirit that illumines our soul. That is the food for our soul. And in fact, the first 3 are primarily foods for the soul. The second 3 I'll refer to are primarily exercises for the soul. And so if you just feed the soul and don't exercise, you're in problems. And if you just exercise and don't feed it, you also have a problem. So the P on PRISMS stands for prayer. Prayer is an essential requisite for spiritual growth. Throughout the writings, it's indispensable. It's one of the most basic practices in most spiritual traditions. And it is basically conversation with God. It is calling on God, turning to God. The House of Justice, and they came to these guidance by studying all the writings. And they gave special instructions on how you should pray. And you should pray with a PhD. And that PhD stands for pure-hearted devotion. So it isn't just, oh, I'm saying my prayer. I said my obligatory prayer today, therefore I'm done. It is not, that is a beginning. If you're not doing that, at least start that. But if you are doing that, then you need to work on pure-hearted devotion. And I can tell you, you'll never get to the end of having pure-hearted devotion. The other, in my study of the writings, my PhD would be purity, humility, and detachment. And so whatever works for you, you need to be praying with a PhD daily. Don't do it to exhaustion. I mean, you're lifting the weights, you do it, and you don't hurt yourself. You don't go to the point where it's like, I'm never going to lift weight again. This is so terrible. You've got to do it so that you get some joy out of it, that you have this connection. It's the Abdu'l-Baha says the sweetest state is the state of prayer. There's no sweeter state in existence in the world of this than the state of prayer. So pray. Number 2 is R, PR in PRISMS. R stands for reading or reciting the verses of God every morning and evening. And again, it's a daily practice. It's an incremental practice. You don't read the book. You maybe just take one passage and you read it. You take one sentence, take one phrase. But the idea that the House of Justice capsulized is that you should read with a RAT. And RAT stands for reverence, attention, and thought. And for those of you who don't think RAT is very reverent, you can change it around and make it read with art, or tar, or whatever. In any case, it's not just reading the writings. You need to be reverent. These are sacred words. These are creative words. These are transforming words. This is the holy medicine from God. This is the food for the spirit. You need to partake of that with reverence. You need to pay attention. You need to think about it. And you maybe need to use that learning mode of reflecting, consulting, studying, acting. So you start with the study, maybe you reflect on that, then you act, then you maybe consult, whatever. But that ARCS helps you to incorporate that. We're going to skip the I and go down to M, because M is one of the foods, and that is meditation. We are to meditate, and we are to meditate daily. But our meditation is different than the meditation that most people think about today, where it's either mindfulness or emptying the mind, whatever. This is meditation on the writings. And so meditation goes right with prayer and right with reading, and that's why they called one of the first books that Shoghi Effendi chose to translate was Prayers and Meditations. And that idea of meditation is very much within the Baha'i writings. And even when you read the writings of Baha'u'llah, you'll see how we are to reflect, consider, ponder, meditate upon. So the House of Justice suggests that we should meditate on the cuff. If you've ever given a talk on the cuff or off the cuff, said some remarks off the cuff, cuff stands for to convey, to understand, and fulfill more faithfully. So you are conveying what you've prayed and meditated about. You are trying to understand it, and you are trying to fulfill it more faithfully. The actual words they use is to understand more deeply, convey more accurately, and fulfill more faithfully. But to make it simpler, we've gone with that. So I'm going to go back to the I. The I in that statement is teach the cause, because I'm often sharing this developing human potential. This talk that I'm giving now is not a talk for Baha'is. It's a talk for educators everywhere. And so I give these same guidance to them in terms of developing. And so when I speak with them, is inspiring or instructing others to become their true selves, to achieve their highest potential. The two S's then are left. So the first S, doesn't matter which one you take, is service. And it's selfless service, which is getting rid of the ego to the cause of God and to humanity. And it is through your trade or profession, which, as we know, when done in the spirit of service, is prayer, it is worship. And so this is an exercise. Each day you need to serve. Each day you need to teach. It's an exercise. It does feed the soul, but it's also an exercise that, you're praying, reading, meditating. Then you've got to teach. You've got to give that out. You've got to use that to serve humanity. And finally, the last one, which you could spend the rest of your life, and I hope you do spend the rest of your life pursuing all of these, but this one is to strive every day to bring yourself and your life in accordance with the teachings of Baha'u'llah. And so if you're going to pick to strive according to anything, go back to that first where strive to be more truthful, to be more loving, and to be more just. And maybe initially just focus on one of them. Today, I'm just going to try and be truthful because it's an exercise. It's like playing any sport, learning any new technique, any art. You need to break it down. If you're going to practice a swing or some movement, I like to play tennis, and I'm not very good, so I get to think about it. I get to strive every time I play. I try to. I have to think about one thing: keep your eye on the ball, follow through, get your feet in the right place. Whatever. If I try to do all of them at once, I can't do it. So I get one down, and then I add the other. So I'm pretty good at truth. Now today I'm going to focus on loving. Now I'm going to try and put the two together. And that's kind of the way we learn. It's the way we grow and develop. So friends, I think that's probably more than you bargained for, but I hope it's been helpful to you, and I hope it made some sense. And I'd like to use the rest of the time for consultation. I've given you things to think about. What you're going to have to do now is every day you're going to have to put these things into practice. You're not going to be able to take all these things I've said today and do it. You're going to have to kind of break out all of these concepts. And I'm going to just attempt to share my screen while we hopefully will try to and I guess I should say, if you go to my website, you'll find all sorts of you'll find different compilations. I have courses, I have books. What I'd like to do is to just share this last little model, and I'm trying to make it fit a little bit better onto my screen. Let's enter the full screen, see if that's better. So this may help you to put all of the things together. So to work backwards, over here, you see the PRISMS model, just with a keyword. And over here, you can see we start with the body, develop the mind, and work out to the soul. We start off in the middle, basically as a one-cell creature, and then we get to know, love, and will through the body, to the mind, to the soul. As we move out towards these, this is moving us towards truth. The love is moving us towards unity. And as we move out here, it's moving us towards justice. And ultimately, it is to know, love, and will God, or the manifestation of God. So I hope that's helpful to you. And again, you'll be able to find this on my website and such. So please, comments, questions, consultation, reflections.
Thank you, Rod. What was the date of the letter from the House of Justice on the PRISM?
1st September 1983.
Thank you.
So could I, because I am a teacher, could I get some feedback from everybody? If everyone could just give me some, either what I often do with my classes, I ask people to give 2 stars and a wish. What did you like? 2 things you liked about it, and 1 thing you wish that would have happened that didn't happen. So next time I can do better. So if you can think of that and put that in the chat, and I don't know if we'll be able to keep the chat, but hopefully. So any other comments or questions?
So because everybody is being so polite, I'll barge in.
And I'm going to start sharing so I can see you, and yeah.
Yeah. So I was very interested in the list of actions that
Yes.
were included in that article. And Mr. Dunbar, I don't know when you said in the 80s. I don't recall if he was still on the House at that point. But I think he was. I think actually he left. He was retired in 2010. But in any case, he has prepared some very interesting collection of references that the Guardian made on different occasions to the fundamental things that Baha'is needed to do every day. Every day.
Yes.
And they were prayer, meditation, study of the writings, and action. So very, very similar to this list that you provided. So that's why I thought it's very possible that they made the decision to write about this paradigm or this set of obligations without referencing that it came from the Guardian, because they thought about it and they decided we want to endorse this for the Baha'i community. In any case, very similar to each other. And what I found what I found particularly interesting was that they were all necessary. You know,
Yeah.
if you leave out, a lot of people will pray, okay? They pray and they act and they think, well, okay, I did my obligation. I prayed and I acted. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you didn't study the writings, then you're missing out on something really essential. And if you
Yeah.
didn't meditate, if you did not exercise your noggin and really, let your brain respond to whatever you've read and take the time. It takes time to meditate, to ponder. He says that ponder, reflect, consider. It's all the same thing. It's using that faculty of reflection.
Yeah.
And, as Abdul Baha in that wonderful description of this Persian society that everybody would sit down in this room and then they ponder something together.
Yes.
And what does it take? It takes time, it takes concentration, and it takes quiet.
Mhm.
So 3 things essential, which are all 3 things that us moderns complain about all the time. We're constantly saying, I don't have the time. It's too noisy. There's, and concentration is probably the worst one, because we say like, well, I'm thinking about 100 different things at the same time. No, you have to do that. You have to just focus yourself on doing just that one thing. And you do the one thing. And it's very, when you think about it, the essential teaching of Judaism and of Christianity is thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength. That's concentration. That's focus, right? And and that was the problem, really, maybe the major problem with polytheism, apart from the fact that you're praying to something that doesn't exist, but it's that you're fragmented. You're all over the place. You're not focused on the one entity that can actually make a difference.
Very good.
By the way, we have 2 absolutely wonderful therapists in this group now that Yana McCrae has joined. So I'm outing them. She and Sue Emmel have so much to say, and you have to prod them a little bit for them to say it.
Go for it. Consider yourself prodded.
Ouch.
Oh, yeah.
You talked about growing up on a farm. I spent a lot of childhood years on the farm too, and it brought the cattle prod to mind when you're trying to push. I
Yeah,
said,
that was not the prodding I bet.
I was. I'd like to make a comment backing up on when you were talking about to act and to will, and you put those 2 together. At first you said act and then you said will.
Yeah.
I began to ponder and contemplate that, let it sink in, and you do have to have the will to act.
Yeah.
And then it reminded me of, in the message from the House of Justice to the Peoples for the Promise of World Peace, when it suggested as our only option to the unimaginable horrors precipitated by humanity's stubborn clinging to old patterns of behavior, which we're witnessing today, the only option that was offered was an act of consultative will. And I've always been contemplating that. And oftentimes in talking about it, I'll say just the act, just the will to act. It's just the will to consult.
Yeah.
As an action, as an option. And today, listening to you put that act and will together, that they're really inseparable.
Yeah. I think acting is the physical manifestation of the will.
Yeah. Unless you're poked with a cattle prod, and then your action is not necessarily it's more different.
We'll let the fear of God be the cattle prod in this case, in this metaphor.
A good poem.
So thank you, Sue. I've always enjoyed your observations and your comments. Thank you.
You're stimulating. It's a positive cattle prod. Thank you. Because we are like cows, aren't we? Otherwise, if we don't engage
as Abdu'l-Baha called,
our higher potential, we are kind of like just cows standing around chewing our cud.
and Abdu'l-Baha made that comparison. He said the realistic philosophers are the cows, but the cows are actually better off because that's all they need. They're just happy chewing their cud. But yeah. But that's what humanity is. I mean, if you're living on that animal level and you're actually glorifying that, you're better than a cow.
Yeah.
And I guess to take this prod, which I didn't think was a good metaphor at first, but I'm growing into it very quickly. All of these problems going on in the world, they are going to be the most great prod to make humanity wake up, to finally move, to get off their duffers and do something.
Yeah. 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 And it's a willingness to be trained also, that we have this mind, this capacity that you talked about. But if it's not well trained, if it's not well educated and well trained and informed and enlightened and illumined by the heart that's in love with God, then it's a dangerous thing.
Well, education is, and that's why I'm in education, and Baha'i education is such a important thing because it is the vehicle that can transform this world both inner and outwardly. And that's what the Baha'u'llah says is not the purpose of every relation to transform both the inner and outer and change the character. So that's what it's about.
At the I think it was the St. Louis conference some years ago, I had volunteered to do children's classes, having no real experience with that, and as a relatively new Baha'i at the time. And I had this group of children, and we were standing at the top of a hill, and at the bottom of the hill was a pond, and there was a man with his black lab dog, and the dog was just sitting as still can be until the man raised his hand, and then you could see the dog tensed every muscle. And then the man would throw the stick into the water, and the dog would just leap almost simultaneous to that movement, get the stick, bring it back, drop it down, and then sit very tightly waiting. And they played this game, and I stood there with children and said, let's just observe this. There's something to learn from this man and his dog, because it's like you and your teachers, that this is just a dog, and look at how well trained he is, how he sits and waits for his signal, but he doesn't act until he's given the second signal. And then he's so exquisite in his response, and so exquisite, he lets the stick go. He doesn't play any games because he knows it's just a repetitive. He loves it. And I said, the clue to this whole thing is love. The dog loves what he's doing, and the man loves his dog and loves. So, if we have to develop this love together, this love of learning and love of exercising our capacity. I learned from that right along with the children. It was like a lesson that was provided for us. We didn't have lesson plans. We didn't know what our children were going to be like. It was the first time we met them. They were from all over. They didn't know each other. So it was a magnificent experience for all of us.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else have anything to share before we have a couple more minutes before we close?
See, once you prod me, I have that electrical shock going on.
I just want to let other people have the opportunity if they wish.
Yeah.
I'm trying, and now I'm prodding them. I prodded you, and now, but I can see that there's only a couple people left. So
Yeah, I wanted to say, Rod, I didn't know what you were going to talk about, and so I didn't know how this series of talks was going to manifest itself. And
Yeah.
you ended up talking about exactly what I think should be talked about. When you're going to talk about Baha'is in education, the place to begin are the principles, are the teachings, are how do these teachings actually relate to the education of our souls and our bodies? That's it. And so intuitively, you responded to being the herald, if you will, or the first presenter. And I'm really delighted that this has happened. Because everybody who will listen to this particular first presentation, is going to get a terrific setup for everything that's coming afterwards.
great. Yeah, I'm trying to basically give a conceptual framework for action so that you can use these concepts and this framework to decide what you should do, how you should do it. And so within this, you can go back and say, am I acting from my body or from my soul? Is this a loving or willing thing? Does it involve truth, unity, or justice? And do I need to be praying, reading, inspiring, meditating, serving, or striving?
Yes, and a lot of when we teachers get together, what do we usually talk about? We talk shop, okay? And talking shop means we're talking about methodology, pedagogy. How do I convey this concept? How do I discipline the kids in the class so they don't take over? It's a practical discussion about, what do we do as educators to be effective, right? And you nailed it, because you got to start actually with an understanding of what is human nature and where are we going with our development. What's the aim of education? And because ultimately, if as educators we're not serving the purpose of education, we're pretty much wasting our time. We'd be better off, with a different career, and I remember from talking with my dear friend Yana, who's here, is that that she turned to becoming a therapist because she saw that there were so many kids in the school where she was teaching that needed one-on-one attention to who they were and where they needed to go with their lives. And I think that this is, I'm reminded of Genevieve Coy, who was a Baha'i psychologist who went and spent many, many years of her life serving and administering Baha'i schools in Iran. And I remember reading one of her books that she wrote and being captivated. I think I read it was like 20 years old, right? Because I was studying to be a teacher. And I just found that it really was so important to have that perspective of, we have in our trust the hearts, minds, and souls of these people, whatever age you're teaching. We're serving them. And so we better know what we're doing to the best of our ability. We really need to know, what are we doing here? It's because it's not just a technique, it's we have to be really mindful of the objectives.
Well, and for me as an educator, But as a human being, purpose is the important thing. What is your objective?
Mm.
So at one point in my career, you know, as an educator, I said, well, what is the objective of education?
Mhm.
And I ended up writing an article that was published in the Baha'i Journal of Studies called Absolute Poverty and Utter Nothingness, the Goal of Education.
Ah, wonderful. That's great.
And then later I published another article in the Journal of Thought called The Highest State of Being and Knowing. And it was looking at what the greatest philosophers and teachers of history had said about what is the highest state of being and knowing. And so I put all that together and compared that with Baha'u'llah's conception. And so that and many other papers are on my website.
Oh, look, I finally prodded Yana enough times that she's going to say something. You have to unmute yourself first.
What is
There-
it you want me to say? What is it you want me to say?
Oh, I
Z-
just want,
Z just
I want you,
passed, Z
whatever
just
you want
passed
to
the
say.
computer and realized we were on Zoom.
Oh, oh, you didn't know that before. You thought it
No,
was,
I didn't know.
oh, yes, this whole series is going to be on Zoom. Yeah.
Aha, great. Okay. Good. I've got half an hour.
You got half an hour.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think any of us are in a rush here. So if
Yes.
we're originally scheduled from 2 to 4, and it's 4 and 1 minute, but who's looking at the clock? You know, as long as people have
Yes.
time.
Oh, you guys are done.
No, we're not done because you haven't spoken.
And so what is it we're speaking about?
So what are we talking about? We're talking about purpose. What is the purpose of education? And how do we prioritize that purpose in our own lives? How do we become good self and help auto educators, so to speak, you know, educators of our own souls, but also how do we do it with other people? And I mentioned, and I don't know if you heard this, I mentioned that when you were in a position of teaching and administering, that you had the experience of finding out how much individual students needed help, loving, supporting help, and that was a motivation for you to go into therapy, into becoming a therapist. And then I was talking briefly about Genevieve Coy, who was a psychologist that had a PhD, and she went and she served as the teacher administrator of Baha'i schools in Iran for years, decades. And and so I just thought, you know, this could be a great moment for you to share with whoever's here, that with the remaining people, your experience, or at least part of it. You know, we do have almost daily sessions between now and the 31st of the month, so there's plenty of time.
Okay, so there's 6 of us all together on the call right now?
Yeah, we originally had 8, but then some of the people had to go.
Okay. Do any of you have any specific questions for me?
Well, I thought it would be interesting if you talked about that whole issue of addressing the content of education and not just the process. Yeah,
Okay.
because
Okay.
that's what you were telling me, is that what you found with the kids that you were working with is that people were focused on process, on, you know, how do you manage people in the classroom? How do you deal with their behavior outside of the classroom? How do you make sure that they get their homework done? It was all stuff. It's important things, but it wasn't talking about the soul. Wasn't talking about the individual who's showing up to class could be in really bad shape. And that's their reality, is that they're suffering. And if we don't deal with that, we might as well not be there, because this is the most important thing, is to look at that person's soul and what they need, what support they need.
Okay, so from the point of view of Baha'i educators, which I'm assuming all of you on this call are, nobody wants to be on camera so I can see you. A bunch
Yeah.
of shy
Yeah.
educators, huh?
Yeah, and you even know some of these people. You know Michael Kafis, I know, and Sue Emmel's been on. Anyway, no, they're being shy.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know if Peter told you what the context of my Baha'i education work was in, but I was the director of Townsend International School during its second and third year. And one of the things that became very evident in terms of moral education is these children, to some extent, had identity crises, because even though they were raised in Baha'i families, on a cultural level, they were often living in countries that did not belong to either one of their parents, each of whom were from separate countries. And now they're in Central Europe studying in a Western style education. So in terms of culture clashes, they were all over the place. They had an identity of I'm a Baha'i child, and they had a grounding in the writings, but the writings hold up the ideal for us. They don't really help us. They don't remove the social veils that have conditioned us from a cultural standpoint. So even though we were all Baha'is, even among the staff and students, there were lots of culture clashes, because our Baha'i community was grounded in whatever community we grew up in. That sort of formed our experience of Baha'i culture. So what does it mean, for instance, age equality? If the kids had grown up in a community where their community had actively given them voice and solicited meaningful help from them in service projects, then they came to the school expecting to have an equal voice and be of serious use. If, on the other hand, they were kind of trailing their parents and sort of not experiencing being fully used, that in their Baha'i community, it might have been more deferential. Children watch instead of fully participate. So, and then among the adults also, what became critically apparent to me was, while the virtues are universal, every culture has a standard of, say, courtesy and respect, but the behavioral application of it differs from culture to culture. So even though we were all Baha'is grounded in the covenant, we would continue to inadvertently step on each other's toes in terms of being experienced as disrespectful, when from our orientation we were trying to do the respectful thing. So if in terms of moral education, it's clearly not enough just to hold the virtues up and identify the principles that we need to live by. We've got to figure out what those virtues and principles look like in application, with sensitivity to the diversity of culture that we're navigating. So from a psychology standpoint, you can imagine, just from an attachment standpoint, a lot of the kids had some emotional distress. And my challenge when I came back was to figure out what principles of psychology transcend culture, so that we could go about gaining competent educators and psychologists to address the universal emotional needs, psychological needs of belonging. It's a human experience to yearn for belonging. We're mammals. We die if we're not in our community, if we're isolated. So how do we prepare children to navigate across cultural lines? What does being a world citizen sounded great in children's class back in my homogenous community. I'm all for it. But when you throw us all together and we all say, yes, we want courtesy, we want respect, but there are more clashes there than in a mixed workplace. Clearly, we've got more learning to do. So from an Anissa standpoint, education takes the role of the teacher is to arrange the environment and then guide the child's or the student's interactions with the environment so that they then can glean from it and learn in an organic way. Well, in order to guide the child's interactions with the learning environment, we have to understand that. And for myself, I really thought I was well positioned to understand that because I had been, I still am an American, but I had been raised in Micronesia until I was 17. I came to the United States at 17 and experienced tremendous culture shock. So as a young Baha'i mother, I was cocky. I thought, well, I've been through this, so I can spare my children the same agony. My parents didn't know to factor that in. They didn't know to build bridges for us when we came back and transitioned back into our birth culture where we looked like we should know how to act like Americans. But I'm smarter because I went through this and I know it. My children had just as much difficulty as I did acclimating to the navigation from culture to culture. Even though I had educated them, that we were lucky enough to be able to homeschool throughout their childhood. Their Baha'i service life was intricately combined with their academics. So I was shocked when my youngest went on her year of service and just was brutalized. Because even after my experience in that international setting in Townsend, I still was not accounting for the fact that every Baha'i community in the United States has its own culture. So when the director, and she did her year of service here in the United States, when the director of that program called me in to chastise me on her behavior, what astounded me was everything that was complained about was what I was most proud of her for, that I had intentionally trained her for, to speak up, to advocate for injustice, to challenge, to be a critical thinker. And these were things that well-seasoned adult Baha'is were taking exception with, that she was a youth and that was cheeky and she wasn't getting with the plan. So the notion of how do we do moral education intertwined with academic education and self-advocacy is very complex, and it's a process that we're going to have to figure out as we go and stumble. And that requires open dialogue, and that requires a willingness to set aside our judgments against each other. And what can we learn? It's not that there's a right and a wrong. This is a confusing world that we're living in. Right. So this weekend we had a big deepening, and we were reminded that the Shoghi Effendi was running around Israel when World War II was unfolding, or we were mopping up after it. And here we are now where, again, we're on the brink of redoing a lot of those things that we should have learned from history had been done. And I was tempted when I first received the assault of all that brutality emotionally to just say, what the heck are we, when are we going to get this right? What is it we're supposed to do? And fortunately, I was at that deepening and reminded, Shuggy Findi just put one foot in front of the other. He didn't say, let's wait on the next plan until the world events calm down. We just keep going about our business. And if one thing we can do for our children and young students is to inspire them to be the best they can be, to strive to be a little bit better today than they were yesterday, to be a part of the solution, then we've accomplished a lot. Trying to tell them what the solution is on a shifting landscape like this is just going to add to more division, right? Because we can only become activists to the extent that we can keep ourselves educated on content, and we can only keep ourselves educated on content accurately if we can figure out where this content is coming from. Imagine what it's like for the Palestinians to be trying to figure this out. And we're watching a completely different news set from the Israeli point of view. Mm. So trying to take a stand on who's more right and who's more wrong and who, what we should do, that's not what our work is about. On the other hand, we don't want to leave our students feeling helpless, like the whole world's going to hell in a handbasket and I have no control. There's nothing I can do. So part of our job as educators is to inspire them to be advocates for peace. They don't have to be activists that require them to really have concrete, accurate, reliable information and take a side, but they have to ask themselves, from my standpoint, what can I do to contribute to a peaceful process? And sometimes the answer to that feels totally backwards. When I was very shocked to find myself as a Baha'i and a peacenik, basically, an old hippie, working on Marine bases around the world. It's like, what the heck am I doing? Right? But somehow in my mind, it felt like we spend millions of dollars twisting people's brains into pretzels so that they can tolerate going against human nature and participating in war. The least I can do is try to help untangle that and build a bridge for them back into civilian life when they're ready to go back, and not add to the demonizing of a culture, the military culture, that is a foreign concept to me. So I don't know if I answered your question at all, but that's my on the fly 2 cents. Are there any questions?
Well, Rod, I'd love to hear your response, because you're I don't know if you've ever talked with anybody who's taught at a Baha'i school, whether you've had any specific contexts in that field, but this was Yana's. She parachuted into this Townsend schools, it's like, and by the way, it was wasn't it before you went to Townsend that you went to National University and got your master's degree? Right. Mm-hmm. So you got a master's degree in Anissa under the tutelage of Dan Jordan and Don Streets. Okay. Mm-hmm. Like, woo! I mean, there are not too many people in the world who've had that experience, and then you parachuted in immediately to run this school in the Czech Republic, with how many nationalities represented?
I think we had about 21 students and staff from 21 different cultures.
Yeah, and we're talking really different cultures like Persian
Yes,
and American. Those things are
right.
really different from each other.
Hmm.
So I'd be really interested, Rod, have you ever had that sort of experience, or have you had an opportunity to talk with somebody who's had that experience?
Well, I have traveled to 65 different countries, and I have been in many different school systems. And because I was a professional educator, and I've been to the Townsend School, and I know several people who work there, and and I have friends in Baha'i schools around the world. So I do have different experiences and different knowledge. So I know it's a challenge. It's the simplest I can say. And then I was in Panchgani in India at the Baha'i Academy, which is also where the Merit School is, when COVID hit. And so I left there, and now I'm here.
Well, here is the Virgin Islands, right?
Yes,
Ah,
it is.
Yes, yes. And now you're doing you're writing and you're consulting, right?
Are you talking to me or Yana?
No, I know what I know. Yana is she's a full-time therapist. That's why she had half an hour. She doesn't have half an hour anymore. She's got like 15 minutes because she's got a client. Yeah.
No, I'm not doing writing. I did retire from academia in 2012 when I was the head of the School of Education. And I went to the World Center, volunteered for 7 years, and dedicated myself to full-time service, and decided that I would continue doing that the rest of my life. And so I am going wherever I can feel I can be of most service. And right now that's the Virgin Islands, and it's worked out very well for me. So I'm working with the youth. I'm
Oh,
on the National Spiritual Assembly, the National Growth Committee, External Affairs Committee, local spiritual, etc. So I'm very involved in different activities here. But also serving the greater community with different organizations and such.
Hmm.
And I'm currently working with Oscar de Grue, who was the founder of the Baha'i Youth Workshops in the 70s and 80s. So we're going to schools, and we're going to different groups to try and introduce that and youth empowerment here on the
Yeah.
they are.
I don't know if everybody here has had that experience, but I remember becoming good friends with some of the people who were running the workshops. And I just would go and see performance after performance, and I was just so impressed with the response they got from people.
Yeah.
It was, and at that point, I knew that we were missing out on something by just giving straight firesides all the time. But I had no idea what could take the place of a straight fireside until I saw these kids. And then okay, that works.
It's powerful.
And so he's doing that down in the Virgin Islands. That's terrific. We really miss it up here. I could tell you that. There are a whole lot of youth up here in California who wish they could have that experience.
Well, he was there before he came here. So he traveled around the United States doing this as well.
Uh-huh.
Well, I'll add that I was at Townsend for the second and third year. The first year was predominantly performing arts, and In my opinion, that's what formed the heart of the school. That the children, and it was an English immersion school, which means that all of the students were learning English at the same time that they were learning their grade level academics.
Ooh.
And my part of my job was designing the curricula that would meet all of the feeder countries' standards and have the Baha'i vision in it. So finding the textbooks was was a treasure hunt in and of itself. But the performing arts piece of it, I think, really enhanced their language, and it gave them a sense of meaning and groundedness in their ideals, and they were able to perform for lots of different countries. So it doesn't only spread the faith or enliven the
Yeah.
audiences, it really is fulfilling for the participants who are doing the work.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In so many different ways, because that whole thing of developing an esprit de corps, a feeling of solidarity with a group of people doing something together. I mean, I've been a professional musician for ever since I was in, like in my 20s. And I often don't even think about what it would be like to not be one. But then I see other people who are, they feel so bereft of having a deep, enduring connection with other people, where they're sharing something together that they can't share by themselves. And the reality, as a classical singer, I can't just get up and sing. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
I've got to have an ensemble of people that I perform with, and that ensemble makes the performance. That's it. And I was having a talk with JB Echo about that just yesterday, and he played with Santana. He played with top rock and roll bands. Same experience. It's like doing it with a group of people gives you such meaning in life. It's so, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's great to have an audience that cheers you on. We all love that, but it's the actual partnership with your fellow creative agents that is the most important. It nourishes you spiritually. And so I think it's a really smart move. There's another private school up in Canada that's also arts based. I'm sure that Rod, you know the name of that school. What is it called? There's just one in Canada. It used to be Maxwell, but there's this. It's in.
Now you're making me think on it.
Oh yeah, I'm just trying to remember, and then I used to know the guy's name who runs it. Because I met him at a few conferences. Anyway, it's a school of the arts.
Yeah.
And so they're
Yeah,
they're doing the complete curriculum, any other kind of curriculum, plus they're doing Baha'i curriculum, but the arts are what, that's the glue. It's really the glue for them. And I really feel that for maybe most young people, the arts is glue, because they all love dancing and they all love singing and they all love performing and pretending that they're somebody that they're not, because there's a lot of that in performance as well. It's trying out another identity. It's having,
it's a Nancy Campbell school.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, he's managed to keep it going. Kol hakavod. I'm really, congratulations to him. It's private schools have a really hard time surviving these days.
Somebody, you should be inviting him to this Baha'i Educators to see.
I did.
Okay.
But
What's his name?
What's his name?
I'm blanking.
You're blanking? I'll bring it to the next meeting and I'll send you all an email, okay?
Okay, great.
When I get it. It's something like Nadler or Natter or something like that. Anyway,
Before I go, may I meet the other three on here?
well, you saw Michael for a minute.
I got a
Let's
glimpse.
there
Hi,
we go.
Michael.
That's Michael.
Where are
Uh,
you?
I live in New York State.
Okay, great.
Now, can we get Sue? Will Sue show her face? How about
gonna-
Julia?
The Little Prince. What is important is invisible to the eye.
All right. Well, Sue is beautiful, I know, because I've seen her. So she must
Where
be
are
having,
you, Sue?
what do you have, a bad hair day or something like that, you know?
Well, I just like to emphasize getting to know each other's soul rather than our appearances.
Oh. Oh.
I mean, it's not possible to do that in physical form. You just can't hide under a veil. But this is an opportunity to really discern our qualities without seeing each other. And
That's true.
because prejudices are unconsciously triggered just by appearance, automatic. I know that actually painfully from the time I was a child. You're too young. Then as I age, it's you're too old. And it's like, you don't know my soul.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
So-
sorry to interrupt, but I did have a meeting at 7 o'clock and they are calling me to
Okay.
They're
Monday.
calling you.
the National.
Ron, it was great seeing you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
God,
And we'll hope to see you again soon.
God willing. Thank you.
Aloha, everybody.
Aloha Pao. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Peter, I'm wanting to confirm, are you still starting the Worlds of God series on November 1st? I have it in my calendar. Or is
Yes,
that
ma'am. And I want you to be a speaker.
so it is going to start on November 1st?
Yes.
Okay, I've got it on my calendar. Yeah.
Okay. Yes,
yeah.
November 1st, and I'm currently in the process of arm twisting and prodding.
All right.
Okay. So I can get people to, and Michael's gonna speak, I know, and Ronnie Tomanio's gonna speak, and I'm gonna speak, and who knows, maybe we'll, and Yana had to disappear, but I'm hopeful we'll get Scott to participate as well. But Sue, I would love for you to give a talk because you brought so much to our conversations. And just responding to what other people were saying, and I know you've got a spiel in you. So consider it.
Okay.
All right.
Well, do you have a date? Do you have dates that are open? Or are you trying to
They're
fill?
all open. I haven't booked anything yet. And I tried to get the first comers to reserve dates, and they didn't reserve dates. They did tell me they wanted to present, which is good, but so I don't have anything blocked out at this point. And I want to do it because actually it's easier to schedule people once somebody starts committing to a time period.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
When people have too many options, I notice they don't seem motivated to do anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to ponder this and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, and just consider, you could either do 10 to 12 Pacific or 2 to 4 Pacific. So you can choose your time slot and then the day of the week. So whatever day really works best for you.
Would it be a chore for you to create some kind of a grid with these dates and time options, and send it out to people who you want to present, so that we can just fill in the grid that we want to take? Would that be?
You know, I've tried to do that, but then what happens is that they look at all of the options and then they're really frozen. It's
Oh,
like, it's like bringing a kid into a candy shop. You mean I can have this? Oh, and I can have that? You know? Like,
I
and I'm
think
Yeah.
maybe it's easier just to say, can you fill in this time slot?
yeah, it is. It is easier. Uh,
And then
uh,
if they say no, then you say, how about this one?
yeah, but then if they start saying no regularly, then
Yeah, um, you really, it is quite it is quite a challenge. I appreciate the effort you put into the organization and the structure for this, because it's quite a chore, isn't it? And
no,
it's,
it's not a chore at all. It's an honor, and I
oh,
mean that sincerely.
oh,
It's an
thank you.
honor. It's an honor because each one of you has stories to tell that nobody else on the planet can tell. And if we don't record them on Zoom, they may disappear forever.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
And, and you know, s-
Well,
they're
there'll be
they're
somewhere in the cosmic consciousness where we can't
they'll be in
get at
somewhere in
them.
the cosmic consciousness, exactly. But I think our experiences, sharing our experiences, is more needed in this world than it is in the next. Yeah, because we're teaching each other in this world, and we're learning. And the next world, I have a feeling that our teachers are going to be, the souls of the great ones. And so we won't need the feedback from our fellow Baha'is and
Mm,
you know,
mm,
and plus so many of the challenges of living in this world are living in this world. We're not going to have those same challenges when we're somewhere else.
that's right. When I first became a Baha'i, did you ever know Carol Allen? She worked at the World Center, and she worked with Dan Jordan in creating that Birds of Diverse Feathers video. Do you remember that years ago? Do you remember that,
Yeah,
Dan?
yes,
Yeah, she
yes.
and Dan, they're so clever and creative, and they got together. In fact, I just posted the video again. They made a video out of the film strip, and I just posted it on my page. It's really a treasure. It's such a treasure. I think it would be valuable to print a book out of it. It's so clever.
Why don't you send me a link?
All right, I'll
And,
do that.
okay, and then what we can do is after we persuade you to actually commit to doing a presentation, then we'll share it with everybody.
Well, maybe we could make that a presentation in itself. We
If
like
you want to.
we could channel. I mean, I'll be happy to do a presentation of my own, but we could maybe schedule that in a time slot of its own, because it will stimulate tremendous, tremendous, tremendous discussion.
How
It
long
will.
is
I think it's 12 minutes or something like that, but the discussion that it'll stimulate, believe me, wait till you see it. It's so
okay.
clever, creative. Like I said, I'd like to see a book done of it. Maybe we can talk about, I think you're more of a manifester than I am.
Hmm?
Because to manifest this as a book, I think would be, so what we could say is we're channeling Dan Jordan and Carol Allen
Hmm.
at
Hmm.
times that they've agreed to come in from the next world and be spirit presenters of this.
That's a great idea. Okay, so Sue, why don't you do two things?
All right.
Send me that, send me
Okay.
the link to it, and then think about when you want to
All
when
right.
you present yourself. And
Okay.
okay, and
Yeah.
because I what I want to do, we're gonna, November 1st is in 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So so um and so I want to get I really want to get this scheduled as soon as possible, because it's only when it's scheduled that I can send out the marketing materials and tell people about what we're doing.
You're right. It needs to be. Do you have a lineup of presenters you can prod with the most great divine cattle prod?
Yes, one of them is Mr. Kafis. It's right. He's been looking at us and talking with us. Yes.
So Michael, you haven't committed to a date yet either?
Well, the reason I've been holding back is because I can commit to all 10 days and I don't want to hog the schedule.
See
All
what
right,
I mean, Sue? Everybody's got a reason. Sometimes it's too many choices. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'll have 5 minutes free
I
that week.
do. Now Diana Metro did say there's 2 days that she can't. So I could volunteer for those 2 days.
Okay, go for it. That's great. Yeah.
and I volunteer for at least those 2 days. The one with the birds of diverse feathers that Dan Jordan created.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
facilitate that, like just sort of introduce it. And because Carol was my spiritual grandmother. Her
Yeah.
son Steve is my spiritual father. So I'd really be honored to introduce that film strip on her behalf. And I worked with Dan at the National Baha'i Education Office. I worked with him,
Oh.
So I'd be honored to do that for both of them. Yeah. Yeah. All
Wonderful.
right. Well, we'll try to lock in a date. I'll get back to you. Yeah.
All right. Very
Thank
good.
you so much. This is great. I'm glad
You're
you're doing. Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. And by the way, I invited about 150 Baha'i educators from around the world, and
Really?
and they will come. It's just, they have schedules, they have conflicts, and
Mhm.
and then also many of them know each other, and so the buzz from this first meeting will get around.
Yeah. How do you like the format where there might be a key speaker or not, and have a round table where people with so much capacity and then with a certain amount of humility and modesty, everybody holds back in favor of someone else and then nobody steps up? That's what you're facing right now. So I'm just wondering if a round table type thing where people just pipe in.
Well, I've found that the people who pipe in, so to speak, do so spontaneously if they're feeling attracted and if they feel comfortable with the group of people, and
Right.
that's why I knew I could ask Yana to go and talk about her experience, because she and I are really old, close friends. And I knew that the fact that she's not an inhibited person generally, but especially if I'm there, you know,
Oh,
she knows, well, if Peter's involved, then it's a safe experience. Okay. There's not going to be anybody who's going to be critical of me or say, on the other hand, that was my father's favorite expression, by the way. Whenever I'd have a conversation with him, which usually lasted half the night, then he'd say, yeah, Pete, but on the other hand, you know,
Ah,
you know, and so because he was very unsure of his own views, and so he could always see the potential for a equally good argument being made for the opposite point of view.
uh-huh. And that, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So anyway, she's, she feels safe to do it. But some of the people who were on this call, I've never seen them before,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
and so they don't know me, and then knowing people is also another thing, because I didn't really want to have any famous personalities
Yeah.
in this initial group, because people get all strange and quiet around famous people.
True.
They
It's
oh, well, I don't have anything to say. That's a famous person, you know. Go listen
true.
to them.
That's true. In fact, Carol, that was one of the first things Carol warned me about when I became a Baha'i, is we do have a star system in the Baha'i community. She says there's no provision for it in the Baha'i writings.
Mm-mm.
We bring that tendency in. It's an old
Mhm.
behavior. We're stargazers, and
Yep.
we then have the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots they're never able to join the community of the haves. They're
Mhm.
and so she warned me, and she said, just don't let people make a star out of you, and don't worship people who seem to be the stars in the community. There's always going to be somebody who twinkles, and then people are going to just circle around them and gaze at them, and then sort of modify their own light. And
Mm.
she was so encouraging, because she herself came from a family. Robert Mitchum was her brother,
Mhm.
and herself was in entertainment her entire
Mm.
adult life. Um, Aside from working at the National Center and the Baha'i World Center
Mhm.
in an administrative capacity, she had a professional life in entertainment. So she
Mhm.
knew the sort of the poison of the star system and abhorred it. She just abhorred it. She was so sparkling herself. You just can't help you can't help but shine, and people can't help but notice it.
Yeah.
So she says it fosters ego, and it's dangerous in the Baha'i community. And she says it's a real burden to the individual who has star qualities to modify themselves and to raise up other people to use that quality. And you have that quality. You have that quality to turn the spotlight around to other people. That's admirable.
Yeah, but Sue, the reason why turn the spotlight is because I don't like it on myself. Honestly, I don't. I end up feeling very uncomfortable when people
That,
say, I'm a professional musician." Do you know how many times people have said, "Oh, you sing so beautifully. You have such a beautiful voice." And I cringe.
yeah,
Literally, I cringe. It's like, don't make me into some kind of a special thing, you know?
right,
It's like, I
right,
appreciate that you enjoyed the performance. Okay, that's
right,
fine. But this performance is not about me showing off how great I am. That's
right.
like has nothing to do with that, you know?
Yeah,
Because um yeah, it's just and this is something uh this is something that, like, my daughters think that performance is all about showing off your personality, because
mm,
that's what people do in pop music.
uh-huh,
And but I come from a whole different, classical music. It's like, you want to disappear. You want
mm,
people to say your interpretation of that particular piece by Mozart or Bach or whoever it was so moving and genuine and authentic. That's what I want to hear. That's what I want to hear. Because I'm there to serve the music, not
mm,
not to become a great personality.
uh-huh. Where you say, I saw Pavarotti, and you don't remember what he sang. You just remember that you saw Pavarotti.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
And you know what, Pavarotti, I heard this from people who perform with him. Pavarotti was terrified every time he was in his dressing room waiting to go on stage. You know what?
Wow. Why?
He was terrified because he thought, what if I miss that note?
Oh,
I don't sing as beautifully today as I did yesterday, you know?
oh,
And as he grew older, he was taking on more and more music that was kind of outside of his vocal
yeah,
character. He was taking on more dramatic music, and that's
yeah.
where you get scared. It's like,
Uh,
the stuff that I've been singing for 20 years, I could sing it for another 20 years, not a problem. But when I'm going to take on something that's more challenging, because everybody wants me to do it. I haven't done it yet. So I should go and do that. Now I'm really scared because,
Uh-huh.
I made them happy before, and that's the other problem is you have all these performers who got addicted to getting their self-worth massaged by an audience.
Yes, right, right.
And I know from years of experience, it's an awful addiction to have because
Yes.
it makes you happy for 5 minutes when they're clapping. And then afterwards, it's just like eating sugar. Okay.
Uh,
You eat
oh,
sugar, you feel great, tons of energy for a couple of minutes, and then you crash.
uh, ah, and then
So
and that's it. That's interesting. Thank you. Yeah.
all right,
All
I'm going to say goodbye because
right.
Michael has just had to leave and I have to go and take care of my
Yeah.
baby girls. Okay? So
Great.
love
Thank
you,
you for
Sue.
sharing. Yeah,
Send me an email soon.
I will. I'll do it tonight. All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Aloha pa.
Aloha.